So, hello, welcome back everyone. My name is Valentina Bianchini. I have the great honor to be the chair of the next panel session. Before we started, I wanted to tell you a little bit about me. A lot of you already know me. I am a PhD candidate in management at the University of Rome Tor Vergata, and I'm also a member of the Sapiens network. And today I will be here to chair this panel, which is about a topic of great significance, international context, how to turn research into policy impact. So this morning we had this beautiful panel talking about the Danish context. We will move now from the local Danish context to have more of an international angle. And we will do so thanks to a wonderful team of panelists that represent very different worlds and that we will have the pleasure to introduce to you in a bit. Before introducing them, I want to show you what is the agenda for this session. The session is about providing feedback from a real-life policy environment on how to ensure that policy impact is achieved via our research. And this panel is a bit different from the one that we had so far. We will have 2 rounds of questions. The first one more general and then going more narrow, more specific. And then I will hand back the floor to you guys for question and answer. And at the very end, our valuable panelists and experts will provide us feedback on the policy brief that we drafted. So they selected some policy briefs and they will provide general feedback on those. I will then move to introducing to you our panelists, starting from Professor Nicola Countouris. Is a professor in labor law and European law at the Faculty of Laws of University College London. And he was also director of the research department at the European Trade Union Institute. Not only that, he's also an independent expert for the International Labour Office and the European Trade Union Confederation and the European Commission funded projects. So welcome Professor Countouris, so he will represent not only the academic world but also his valuable experience as director of a research department for the European Trade Union Institute. And then we have the pleasure to have with us Arnhild Dordi Gjønnes. Excuse me for my pronunciation.
No problem.
Okay. She is attorney at law at the Confederation of Norwegian Enterprises, and she's also the chair of the public contract groups in Business Europe. She was also a former member of the Advisory Committee of Public Procurement at the European Commission and lecturer at the University of Bergen, Erasmus course, and also lecturer at the Oslo Metropolitan University in Public Procurement. She's also a member of several laws committees implement the European Directive on Public Procurement into Norwegian legislation. So Arnhild will also provide a valuable experience coming from more of the business world. And finally, but definitely not least, we have Karoline Kyhn, legal and procurement expert at the European Environment Agency, and we have the pleasure with the Sapiens Network to work in an EU-funded project, and so it's a great pleasure for us also to have your perspective today from a European agency. She was also a former expert at the legal service of the Council of the European Union and procurement officer at the European Commission. So I will ask you a round of applause for them to welcome her. And now, without further ado, let me delve more into our question. So, as you know, our experts come from different worlds, from different fields, so we will have different questions this time, not general questions. The first question will be for Professor Countouris and for Arnhild. And it's according to your experience, first of all, is there a gap between researcher and policymaker? And if there is a gap, which strategies have proven successful in translating complex research findings into actionable policy recommendations that resonate hopefully well with policymakers? Over to you.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much for the introduction. It's such a pleasure to be here. Can you hear me You hear me? Yes. So I thought this was a, a great question. In fact, all the questions that we received are really spot on. Difficult questions. I would acknowledge that there is a gap. You know, I would say this especially as an academic, which is what I am now. The experience that I had as Director of Research as the ETUI is of course slightly different, because the ETUI is a very special institution in many ways. It has a captive audience. It is the technical expertise center of the European Trade Union Confederation. So the ETUI doesn't lobby, doesn't try to have an impact directly on the European Commission, the European Parliament. Sometimes that happens, but their main interlocutor is, of course, the wider public, but also in terms of policy impact, the European Trade Union Confederation. So there is a captive audience, there is an organic relationship between the two. Most of my colleagues can trace their work into specific paragraphs of European directives, recommendations, but it's a very anonymous, thankless tracing exercise. They have huge impact, but it's indirect. So they give technical assistance when necessary to the European Trade Union Confederation. They have their own experts, sometimes legal experts, okay, but the ETUI researchers reinforce that kind, and they're very effective in doing that, because they have honed and developed their knowledge in the realm of research, very often academic research, serious research, long-term research, research that has strengthened their intellectual acumen without necessarily having an immediate impact, which is what academia has traditionally done. So there is a gap, okay, between the long-term vision of academic research and the slightly more short-term applied dimension of, you know, policy-oriented research. Okay, it's healthy and normal that there is a gap. The gap can be bridged, okay, and it's actually bridging. And the second part of the question is, what is the most effective way to translate this research that you produce, that we produce in academia, which is second to none? I'm not ashamed to say that at all. You know, universities have produced top research for 800 years. And we're very proud of that, and we should be very proud of that. There is no think tank, NGO, that will ever replace us in terms of the quality of the research that we produce, okay? But it has to be bridged, and how do you bridge it? How do you translate it? And I think the word translate is really interesting here, because part of this is sometimes we don't speak the same language. We need to find a common language. In my experience, the best way to find this common language is through intense cooperation in mixed working groups with policymakers. And sometimes it means being thrown at the deep end of the pool with people that can swim very, very well. Okay? At times they also feel uncomfortable and they lose patience with us. And it takes sometimes to develop that common language that allows for this translation. Okay? And it requires trust. And of course there is trust within the ETUI, ETUC dimension. I think a lot of people from the European institutions also trust ETUI researchers, they trust academics, okay? But it takes time to develop that common language, and being thrown at the deep end of the pool with these, you know, close, intense cooperation working groups is, I think, the best thing, is much better than publishing your paper on SSRN and praying and hoping that it will be understood by some. So I would say something more the second part of the question, because this is the ideal scenario, but it's very difficult to achieve. Okay, not everyone has the same access that you have if you're in Brussels, in a reputable think tank, etc., etc. Okay, but since you asked what is the best way for me, this would be the best way, being thrown at the deep end of the pool.
Thank you very much, Professor Countouris. Karoline.
Everything is said. No. Yes, I believe as well that there is a gap. But that depends on where you are. For instance, if you are from the labor organization, if you are a person from the labor organization, if you are a person from the industry, we call it you want to lobby. You want to lobby for your case to politicians. Because very often you can see that politicians, they have a goal and they don't know how to reach the goal. But they have they have thought this is what is the reason to do things. And there I think is where you come in. They need data. They need data, and the data has to be, first of all, it has to be transparent, it has to be clear, it has to be trustworthy. You have to find, as I said for 10 minutes ago, the cost efficiency is very important as well for the politicians when they are going to present something. And I think as well how to use the research that you have made. So I think there is a gap, but it's a possibility to close the gap. To close the gap with what you have found. And I have to tell you as well what I didn't say, that was I'm a member of something that is called Public Procurement Academy, as we had established in Norway. And what is that? That is a group of academists from different universities, from the labor organization, from the contracting authorities, and from the suppliers. And we have asked the government to finance this because it is so important. We really want the PhD students, not only PhD students, but students to make research on the area on public procurement. And we have been in 5 years, we have not got any money from the government. Then we thought, this is so important that we have to finance it ourselves. So all the members of the Public Procurement Academy is financing this. And they give scholarships to the students and the PhDs. And we start now to get a lot of good research on the area of public procurement. That could be small and medium-sized enterprises, that could be green procurement, that could be human rights, that could be everything. And we see this is a way to do it. And I completely agree with you that if you should really influence the policymakers, you need to talk to them. Small groups, let them be, invite them to conferences and to show them that if you need the good facts, you need the data. And the data, if the data is not there, you need somebody to tell them how it is. And good research is very, very important. Yes.
Thank you very much. So we are hearing that data are important, is the added value that researcher can provide to policymakers, and we are also learning that they can do that via building trust and collaborative relationship. Now I would like to move actually to Karoline, because she has a unique perspective coming from a European agency. And actually we would like to know from you, what is the interest of your organization in research? And if you engage with a particular field, here in the room you have PhDs from different disciplines. It's an interdisciplinary network, the Sapiens network. You also have lead researcher and professor coming from very different disciplines. So we are very interested to know who are you working with if you work with researchers.
Yeah.
Over to you. Thank you, Karoline.
Well, thanks a lot. It's really nice to be on this panel. I'm the only one who didn't have to travel here. I was able to come by bike. Because like Valentina said, I work with the European Environment Agency, and it's located here in Copenhagen. And just to explain a little bit, to put it in context for this panel, that what we do with the agency is to support policy development, and we offer analytical expertise. And what we do a lot is collect and disseminate data. So our role is more to support, for instance, the European Commission, which DG Klima, which are actually the ones that develop policy, and also our member states. And I mean, I don't deal so much personally myself with researchers in my job, so I was talking to my colleagues at the agency. We're almost 300 now in total. And hear a bit about their dealings with researchers. And they were explaining to me that you could say that researchers come in very early on in the beginning when you have to develop policy, but where the agency very much is focused, its work is on monitoring implementation. So it's not always that we have this interaction with researchers. But we do engage with them in some ways, and just to explain, kind of at the top of our pyramid we have something called a scientific committee. It's more geared towards senior researchers. It has 15 members. I can't remember the frequency, but I think something like every 5 years we have an open call for expression of interest, and you can apply as a researcher, and you sit on this committee and you advise the agency on our annual and multi-annual programs, and you also give advice when we hire scientific staff of a certain level. And just in general, they provide advice and opinion on different scientific matters. And then we have something that's quite new, which is called the European Climate Change Board, which is a completely independent board, and we act as the secretariat of this board. And again, it consists of senior researchers, so fortunately not postdocs or PhD candidates. And they produce reports that then advise the Commission before they finalize their proposals, when they are drafting, when they are deciding what the policy should be. So it's very much data-driven and not policy-making. And then I thought I'd mention something which is a bit of a hybrid. I mean, at least some of the participants we have at the European agency, a network called the IONET network, and as part of that we have the some national environmental agencies, but we also kind of go to the market. We have something called European topic centers, and we have 7 of those. And each topic center has their own area of expertise. There's a topic center on biodiversity and ecosystems, for instance. And every 5 years we also have an open competitive selection procedures, and we receive offers from consortia that would like to be given the contract of this particular ETC. So each ETC is a consortium. There's a lead organization, and then there are several other organizations that bring their own specialist knowledge. And I would say that most of these partner organizations are from the academia. They most often consist of units within a university that is sort of a spin-off, a more commercial unit, where they make money for the university, but they can very often use university facilities, and they have access to, cheap access to researchers, to students, to PhD students, to newly PhD candidates. So it's a bit of a hybrid construction, 1 foot in academia and 1 foot in the commercial world. And we see that some of these hybrid university units, sometimes they sever ties completely with universities, and they become completely independent and completely commercial. And then I'm sure you're aware of Horizon Europe, which is a huge EU key funding program. And staff members of the agency are very often asked to contribute in some way to these projects. If it has a link to the products that we publish, then we're asked to give feedback to the call for tenders, the text, so that it's targeted to the needs that we have. And then maybe also involved once the project is up and running, attending meetings, milestone meetings, maybe also the final meetings. And speaking to one of my colleagues who's involved in operations, he said that he would just like me to pass on that as an individual researcher, the way he sees it is that your best chance of disseminating research would be if you somehow got involved in a Horizon Europe project. That was one of the best ways that you can put forward your data and your ideas. And then I know informally also my colleagues, they go and speak at universities. They also follow some research projects that's close to their area of work, or maybe to a university where they studied. And often, well, not often, well, sometimes we will also get emails unprompted from researchers that read about our products and want to get in touch and have an idea of how we can improve our methods or our products somehow. I don't see very many of them because I work in legal and procurement, but sometimes I see these mails, but I think many of them are received by the more operational staff. And then I thought I'd just mention, because you're PhD students, and I don't know how much you know about the JRC, the Commission's Joint Research Center, which is a DG, the Commission. It's, as the name says, it's a research center, and we cooperate with them as a EEA, and they are a research facility, and they also have a program for PhD students to come and spend some time there as well, so that may also be interesting for you to know something about. I heard, I couldn't really cooperate it, but about 90% of the staff there, so it's also interesting for you maybe once after you get your PhD, 90% of the staff there that don't have a support function supposedly are PhDs or PhD students, so it's a huge research organization. And if we talk about the field, I mean, it's mostly in the natural sciences field that my colleagues come from, and the researchers that we are in touch with, they come from. But we're moving also towards, we're widening the scope of how we look at the environment. We're also looking at environmental behavior, and that means that we're also spreading into the more social sciences as well. So traditionally it's been more focused on natural sciences, but now more social sciences as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, please.
Could I just say
Sure.
something if we are
please.
on that? Because you
Of
said
course.
one strategy was to invite policymakers to seminars or whatever. I think if there is a topic on the agenda, you see it in the newspaper, if you are a researcher on that topic, take the phone, call the politician and say, I have done a research on this area. And not only to the politician, also to the media. Because the media is very interesting. They don't have data, they don't collect data. They look around and they don't know you, but they can know somebody who has been in the newspaper before. But do it. And I see some of you are smiling. I'm doing it myself. I call the journalist I never have talked to before. I say, oh, I have some impact or input on that. Could we have a talk? Yes, and suddenly you have your face on the first side of the media, newspaper. And this is a little bit funny, but I think this is the way to do it, because they never know that you have done the research on a very interesting topic at the top of the political agenda. So I think just go away.
Thanks, Arnhild.
Yes.
I will take off a little bit my hat as chair now, and I will bring my hat as PhD. Yesterday we talked a lot about the imposter syndrome and how, as a young researcher, not in terms of age but in terms of experience, how can we actually overcome this kind of fear? So actually, I think that's why my colleagues are smiling over there, to have the courage to actually call a politician or to send an email. It's interesting anyway to see that actually all the organizations you are working with actually not only have a different way and structure and informal ways actually to engage with researcher, but also that you are investing a lot on that. I mean, we can hear that there's a lot of funding coming from the EU, but also members that are willing to fund with their own funds research. So I think this is there's hope then actually this data-driven policy making can actually happen.
Yeah, we are doing that through this academy, but we give scholarships on public procurement ourselves as well. So I think this is a way to go.
Perfect, thank you very much. So let's then, for the interest of time, move ahead with the more specific questions. And I would like to start again with you, Nicola, and ask you, how can academic institutions better support their researcher in conducting policy-relevant research and communicating their findings to policymakers and the public?
So I think this is a great question. The word impact has entered fairly violently UK academia nearly 30 years ago, and it's staggering to see how little universities have done in terms of resources to support the impact of the work of their academics. This has started to change because increasingly funding of university is driven by the impact of the research, but it has only started to change in the last 10 years, I would say, more markedly in the last 2 or 3 years. I think impact requires 3 factors, and I'm generalizing. And on all 3 factors, well, 2 in particular, universities can really do more. The first one, it requires an impact strategy. It cannot just be left to chance. Okay, it doesn't happen by chance. If this is clear to me. Okay, you can be lucky. I'll say something about that. It requires rigorous research. You cannot just want impact and an impact strategy. What do you have to say? I mean, and this is where our strengths lie as academics, as opposed to other institutions that conduct research, credible research. It also requires a third thing, which is the luck factor. So, but it cannot be left to luck alone. I want to be clear about this. Now, strategy, it's very difficult to retrofit impact. What I was saying before, you know, okay, you've done some great research, now you create this working group. It requires a period of adaptation, it requires a lot of dialogue, discussion, building trust. It's much better to have an impact strategy as opposed to retrofitting impact on academic research work. And this requires a different type of engagement between researchers, publishers, and communication or media officers of the institutions. They need to build a strategy together in advance. And I think this also requires a bit of training for all of these players. Researchers need to be trained in identifying the correct audience. Sometimes we think we have an audience, but it's not actually the audience that we should be aiming for. Okay, when the first few books that I wrote, I have no idea who I was writing them for. And it showed. Okay. We need to be able to identify the correct process. What is the process that we're engaging? Okay, we have an audience, but how does that audience elaborate, work, processes the information? Okay, the European Parliament, okay, how do they work? What is the committee? And as you were saying before, we need to identify the correct timing. Okay, what is the agenda of the European Commission on this? This is in the public domain, and don't just wait for the newspaper to give the information, because the agenda of the Commission is published a year in advance. Okay, the committees of the European Parliament are very transparent. Okay, so these 3 factors are really important, and we should be trained for this. It doesn't happen. You know, increasingly we have media and communications offices that are able to help us with that, but we need, as academic, training. Publishers also need to be faster and more accessible. Again, SSRN has helped a lot, blogs, all that stuff has really helped, but you know, sometimes you want to publish proper research in academic journals, because that's how you get your academic career, and not through blogs, but through publications in the Modern Law Review or whatever. But this should also become a bit faster, more transparent. There's a lot to learn there. Huh? And comms, you know, again, they need to play an important part here. There has to be a short-term, middle-term, and long-term impact strategy tailored to academic work. And this can only be developed by comms and media people that understand the substance of the work that you're doing, because they cannot be jack of all trades, otherwise they're not able to understand your message. Okay? So you will be in the driving seat as a researcher and academic, but you need to be able to speak to people that it makes a huge difference when you're speaking to a media officer that is dedicated at least to law. Okay. Now the second factor is the quality of research. I'm sorry, it's taking me more than 7 minutes.
No, go ahead, please.
But unless we produce rigorous research, high quality research, you know, the data, analysis that it's impartial, that is strong, impartial in the sense of being independent, as opposed to somebody told us to write this. You know, that you may have your own philosophical beliefs, political beliefs, we all do. And here this lies, I think this is where our strength lies. You know, academic freedom is protected by the statutes of our universities. Make the most of it. Okay? And here a balance has to be struck between serious academic work that takes not a month or 12 months, but it takes half a lifetime, okay? And the pressing needs of the media officer, of the policy institutions. If we don't do that serious work, nobody else does. Think tanks cannot do it. This is not how they're funded. They're not funded for high-risk projects. They're funded for short-term, middle-term projects, okay? Make the most of academic freedom, because if we become think tanks, then we're competing with, people who have been doing it for longer than us, okay? So do not allow impact to drive 100% of your work, okay? It wouldn't work out, believe me. Universities that have done that have actually lost credibility. Institutions that have done, academics that have done that have lost credibility. Even vis-a-vis policy makers, let alone academics. And the third factor is a bit of luck. Okay, you need a bit of luck, especially if you don't have a strategy though. Okay? Sometimes work that you publish now will have an impact 10 years later. Sometimes it's a matter of luck. Sometimes it's a matter of foresight. Sometimes it means that you use your academic freedom to come up with a question that was not on the agenda on the day. But because you were free to choose it, you knew that it was going to become a pressing question. And this applies to think tanks. Former colleagues at the ETUI have been talking about the impact of climate change on jobs since 2009. Nobody in the union world, but even in academia, very few people were interested about that. And we had two researchers, one in particular working on that. They were paid to do that, but it was a big risk. And now the ETUI is at the forefront of the analysis, not of climate change, because we have much stronger competitors there, but at the forefront of the analysis of the impact of climate change on the world of work and trade unions in particular, thanks to this foresight that colleagues had 15 years ago, 13 years ago. So this is more or less, I would say, universities need to help. They can't help with luck.
But as you said, actually with planning, we now understand that, and it's a planning that should also involve, we understand, other stakeholders that are normally not part of our world, so like media, as you were saying. And can I say that, paraphrasing what you said, that we should maybe shift from an output-based kind of research to an impact-based, or from what to research and for who to have an impact, and also position ourselves a little bit better, not to duplicate work that others are doing maybe better or equal, I don't know, to us. And also another added value that you presented to us of research is about innovation and foresight, things that maybe others didn't think about. Thank you very much for that. Second question to Arnhild. How can researchers engage with business in ways that maintain scientific integrity while maximizing the potential for policy impact?
I think I would support your 3 bullet points. I think that researchers should establish partnership with policy-focused organizations. Labor organization, business organizations, all type of organizations. I could give you 2 solutions what we have done. As I said, we are giving scholarships to students and PhD students. We say when they get the scholarship that we have to present the result on our website. So everything what is written is there. So everybody could pick from there. So that I think is very important. Another thing what we are doing this year, the government or the authority that is responsible for public procurement in Norway, every year they have a conference where there are between 400 or 500 people. The day before, we are going to have a research day where we invite PhD students, the universities, the organizations to discuss what we are discussing here and to show how we can go forward to get more PhDs into public procurement, where we are interested in. So, but you could do that in many topics, not only public procurement. This is just an example on how you could do it. Yes. So I think that a partnership is a good way to start a cooperation when you are doing your research.
And you do not see much these trade-off between business interest and, for example, integrity in research. What's your take about that?
We are using a lot of researchers. Why? The reason why we are doing that, when we are presenting something to the government, for instance, we want to do something, then we need to have data. Data is facts. If we are coming up with wrong data, with wrong facts, as was said beforehand, we would never been taken serious. So when we are putting a topic out or something for a researcher, somebody is going to find out something for us, we have to be transparent. We cannot say you have to follow this way, because if not, nobody will listen to us. So I really don't think so. It might happen, but very often we see that the labor organization and the entrepreneurs organization very often comes to the same solution, unless they have political guides. If you have political guidelines, then you will not do that.
So again, transparency
Exactly.
and data.
You have to be trustworthy.
That's
If not,
the key.
nobody will listen to you next time.
Thank you very much, Arnhild. Last question for Karoline. There are 3 questions, it's a bit big. What are the challenges that public agencies face when working with researchers on academic institutions? And are there any specific aspects of public agencies limiting collaboration possibilities with academia, and what can be improved?
Yeah, I don't have any solutions, but I mean, I can certainly identify the challenges. So one big challenge is that the mindset of researchers is very different from the European environment agencies, where researchers more interested in cutting edge and state of the art. What we are looking for as an agency is more what is tried and tested methodologies, what will work in practice and what will deliver a result. And the trend in the natural sciences, as I've been explained to me, is you move to become more and more specialized. I think it applies in general to researchers. You are specialized in maybe a very niche area, a narrow area, and maybe someday you're lucky it can be used. But for us as an agency, it's very often not that we need specialized knowledge, but more often research that will help us see the broader picture. So there's this schisma there. And then I think another challenge is that the whole setup of our work is quite contractual. Apart from these couple of scientific committees we have, when we deal with academia or kind of academia spin-offs, these more commercial units or universities, it's all contract-based. Even these European topic centers, which have a foot in academia, it's based, we have a contract with them. And also the service providers that help us produce our products, it's also a contract. So it's maybe not a setting you as a researcher are very familiar with, and it also means that it's quite bureaucratic. We are bound by procedures and rules, EU public procurement legal framework principles, so that's also a challenge. And for instance, I mean, a question we get quite often is, if you as a researcher, you see a call for tenders, and you want to join it in some way, and you can see that you don't cover all the expertise that you could, but you can see yourself playing a part in a consortium, we would receive an email, or very often, or a phone call, just from a researcher saying, I'm very interested, I can contribute with this, how do I join a consortium, because I cannot cover all the fields. And we have to say, I'm sorry, we don't play a part in that. You have to go find the partners yourself, become part of a bid. So that's a challenge for, I think, for a researcher there. And then also due to the public procurement rules that we have to apply, the financial regulation is that we have to be careful not to share knowledge. I call it kind of like inside knowledge that would give a future service provider a competitive edge in a tendering procedure. So we have to be very careful when we maybe attend workshops or we have something informal and we're dealing with academics, but you never know, maybe they go private or they become involved somehow. So we have to be careful that we don't give some advanced knowledge that will alter the balance, give somebody a competitive edge, so we have to be very open and transparent, and sometimes we have blogs or websites where after some interaction with academia we post it and make sure that it's public knowledge and anybody can contribute and read this. So it's so we're very bound by rules, so it's a huge challenge. I'm not sure I know how to, I mean, we have to apply the rules, so I don't have much of a solution, but yeah, maybe like we heard here, you can always pick up the phone. I mean, you can see who works at our place, or send an email, and at least have an informal dialogue, and who knows, maybe you come with an idea that this staff member of the agency can then apply somehow when we have a call for tenders.
And I think that also resonates very well with what Professor Countouris was saying before about training researcher on things that are other rather than doing research or methodology, like engaging with the media or knowing procurement rules of agencies where you want to have impact on. So training also on different competencies that we normally are less trained on. So thank you very much for that. Last question for you all, since we have the benefit of you having different angles and working in different countries. Do you think that the international context and the national context do conflict with the work that you're doing? Do you see that this creates even more challenges in engaging with policies and with the researcher? Does the geographical location where the institution you work in are based has any effect actually on this? And if yes, how?
I mean, I actually have kind of an opposite experience because we have a very hard time engaging Danish academia for a strange reason, and we are based in Copenhagen. So for a contract that I remember being involved in back in 2016, and we were trying to get the different countries involved, then there was not a lot of interest in the academic world or the national authorities there. So I don't see, so that's a strange challenge actually. But I think that difference from country to country, but you are probably more used to dealing with the institutions in your own country. So even if a new institution is in your country, it's still kind of a foreign animal, I guess. So,
Yeah, I could talk for the Norwegian enterprise, the business enterprise. We are, of course, we have most with academics in our own country. They are there. But we have also used academics from different European countries because they have more knowledge on a special topic. So for us, it doesn't matter as long as the academics, as they speak English. So it's no problem.
Thank you.
Well, I'll leave aside the peculiarities of Brexit Britain, because of course that's a huge handicap. But my impression is that if we talk about research in the realm of European law, and if we talk about areas that are typically regulated by means of, I'm talking about social law here, minimum harmonization, minimum standards, then there is a lot of value in having a very strong understanding of how at least one or two or three legal systems work. Okay, so in fact, being a specialist in a national system, and possibly more than a national system, having a comparative understanding of certain questions gives you an edge in terms of interacting with policymakers at the European level. Okay, so not only is it not a handicap to be a specialist even in English, law, okay, but actually it's often a prerequisite. You need to be both a strong national expert and European expert. It's the logic of European integration after all, you know, it's not something that happens with mandamus, you know, that's what you think if you read The Sun, but if you don't read The Sun or the Daily Mail, you realize that actually you need to have national expertise.
Okay, so thank you very much. Now I will open the floor for your question from the audience. We will have about 20 minutes for your questions. Filippo maybe will help me with the microphone, or yes? Thank you very much. Laura?
Thank you. Thank you for your very, very, very interesting presentations. They are very, very useful to what we are currently doing. I have a question particularly addressed for the public sector. So it seems that you need, on the one hand, you know, like what really has been tried and what really can be implemented in practice and what has been really already kind of like tested. And we, on the other hand, need to collect data, and sometimes that is not available. So that seems to be sort of like a trade-off and a gap. So what can researchers provide, or how can we approach public sector, in your opinion, to access this kind of like, to collect data and to kind of like safeguard obviously concerns that might arise from this collection of data and of an impartial analysis that we might have. That's my question. Thanks.
Who wants to go first? Our panelists? Yes.
I don't come from the contracting authority side. I don't come from the public side, but I have a lot of thoughts on that. But that I will wait until I come to the policy brief, because the policy brief I have picked is very important in relation to what you asked for.
Yeah, I don't sit with it myself on a day-to-day basis. It's a challenge, but it's also a bit what we heard here: know your audience, and I think it's important that you as researchers, it's a premise of research that it is detailed, and it may end up eventually in something that is tried and tested, and then also know that hopefully many of the staff you're talking to used to be researchers. We do have PhDs as well at our agency, so it's you're talking to some of your peers as well. But I'm sorry, I don't have much more to say to that.
I cannot speak for any public authority, of course, but can I say, Laura, that your question really addresses one of the big elephants in the room here, because we have all heard, and it's correct to say, that policymakers, politicians, they have in their mind what the nature of the problem is. Very often they have also a strong electoral or democratic mandate to find a particular solution, and what they want from you is data. Okay? You may or may not have the data. If you have it, good for you. But it's not data that will give you a chair in a university. Okay? You won't just publish an Excel spreadsheet. Now, mind you, wrong Excel spreadsheets have been published, and austerity in 2010 was partly driven by a wrong Excel spreadsheet. Let's not go there. So at the very least, if you have data, have correct data, but that won't give you a chair. What will give you a chair is being analytical, analyzing the data, criticizing the data, coming up with solutions to problems that the data identify, that your analysis of the data identifies. So you have at least another 3 layers of analysis besides data sourcing and data storage and data development. Politicians want your data, okay? But impact for you is not giving your data to politicians. Impact for you is the political world coming to terms with your solutions, with your ideas, your analysis of the data. That's impact for you. Is not necessarily what, for perfectly good reasons, you know, politicians want, because they may have an electoral mandate, because maybe there was a trade union congress, maybe there was a Business Europe congress that said, hey, look, we're looking for this solution. Can you give us the data that supports this solution? This is not what you're trained to do. This is not what academic freedom is about. So be careful in your interactions with the world of policy as well. This is, you know, it's a complex world. Compromises need to be made. It's inevitable. It's part of that common language that you develop. Okay? But compromise, if you look at the Oxford Dictionary, I suppose even if you look at the Cambridge Dictionary, it has two meanings. Okay? Finding a common ground, but also compromising your data, compromising your integrity. Be careful. It's up to you to fine-tune this. And, you know, God thanks, we still have well-resourced universities, we still have academic freedom. Make the most of it. You're the only ones that can make the most of that. Researchers in other institutions don't have a statute that protects their academic freedom. Okay?
Thank you for reminding us of this immense privilege. Any other questions from the audience? Professor Biga?
Thank you so much for Gustavo Biga, University of Rome Tor Vergata, for this very interesting panel. I wanted to ask Dr. Kyhn, I would like to bring a little bit of the public procurement issues in the debate. We are aware from the various reports of UNEP, the United Nations, that in the surveys where they look into how many employees are dedicated by governments to checking on the status of sustainable public procurement, the numbers that come out are staggeringly low, sometimes 0, sometimes 1 employee, sometimes 2 employees dedicated to checking where SPP is going. I was wondering whether your agency is aware of these abysmal numbers and is thinking of centralizing a little bit the push in member states towards a greater level of attention to this matter and possibly create units that refer directly to you into providing you with data that you can then give back to the community, or if there is a debate in the agency about this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. On sustainable public procurement.
On sustainable public.
Not within our agency. We try to apply. I mean, we're struggling ourselves to be more sustainable in our public procurement, especially for the contracts we have with local service providers for canteen and cleaning, etc. But it is an area that we are ourselves. It's challenging for us. We don't apply it ourselves personally as much as we should, especially being an environmental agency. But the initiative in this area lies with the Commission, but I don't have a formal role there. We are observers. It's very interesting if we could in the future maybe pick up the mantle and do a push there. But at the moment, it's not part of our work program. It's not something we've been mandated to do. A lot of our work is delegated to us, but it's certainly something. It's an interesting thought, but at the moment, no, we don't have a formal involvement. No,
Okay.
but thank you for that.
If there are no further questions, I would like to wrap up the session going back to the first question, which was is there a gap between policy and research? And we understood that actually there is a gap, but we also now know that we have various ways for overcoming that via collaboration, via training, especially of researchers in various areas, via funds, of course, that needs to be there to support the work, our work as researcher, and to provide with policymakers with the data that are solid, rigorous, and of course we learned that it's important to factor in time for planning and time for overcoming this trade-off between short-term objective and long-term objectives. I think these, if I did well my job, are the key takeaways of this session. Before we conclude, as I anticipated at the beginning, we have the great privilege to have our panelists having read our policy briefs. So I would like to hand over to them the floor again for them to provide us with feedback coming from the real work-life experience. So I would kindly ask you, whoever wants to go first, to tell us first of all which policy brief you selected, and then tell us about your feedback. Thank you very much.
Should I start? Or yes?
Of course.
Thank you very much for giving these policy briefs. They were so interesting. And I had a hard time to pick between two. And the one was with small and medium-sized enterprises, where my real heart is, because in Norway we have a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises. Public procurement is around 90-95% small and medium-sized enterprises in Norway. But this is an area, I can agree with everything was said there. But I wanted to challenge myself a little bit as well. So I thought that I should pick the policy brief that says, can data monitoring help the uptake of sustainable public procurement in the EU member states? It's very interesting. And what we say, the kinder egg, the egg is there. It is there. Because yes, the European Commission has a tool that they can really use, and I suppose many of the countries in Europe has the same tool. And we have this tool as well, because data, as we have said, data is fact, data is a valuable asset. It can be used to inform decision making, it can improve operational efficiency and support development and new policies and programs. Let me take a step back and see what have we done in Norway. But first of all, I will say, next month, the European Commission is coming up with new e-forms. E-forms is the forms that put down what the contracting authorities is going to buy. And the suppliers has to fill in that they can support what the contracting authority is asking for. What is important in relation to that? That is, many countries, they have a national notification database for public procurement. In Norway, we have one. There has been a discussion whether we should have fragmented and have more, but we have one public notification database. Everybody is happy with that. We have compared ourselves to Sweden, where they have a lot of different notification databases. But to have one, it's so easy for the suppliers to go to this database to see, are there any notification? Are there any bids there, which I could be interested for me? And the website, this is interesting for the suppliers, but, and here comes what we say, the kinder egg, the very gold egg. The website helped the contracting authorities to create and publish notices in accordance with the directive and make easy for suppliers to find. But the question now is that public contracting authorities can now answer if they have got any environmental and social consideration by announcing on this database. This will provide statistics, not only for the things we know from beforehand, but it will provide statistics for the contracting authorities, which kind of suppliers can give us, for instance, green procurement, which suppliers are able to stick to the human rights questions that we ask for. This information will give a database, I would say. And it is exactly the same above the EU thresholds in the tenders electronic daily, the EU database. They will get exactly the same information. The countries can collect it and they can use it as a new tool for looking big companies, medium-sized companies, or small companies. And the Commission has also provided another thing, which is not mandatory, but it is up to the member countries to use. That is a contract register. I have proposed to the government put this contract register into this notification database, because then you will not have only the statistics from the e-forms, but you will also have the statistics who has got the contract, to which price, and not the price when you bought the supplies or whatever. But you can put into the database at the end of the day, what did it effectively cost me as a contracting authority? So here there are so many tools if the member states use it in the right way. So I think to the one who is writing this paper, the word is there.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Arnhild. And if you have any then suggestion also for about the structure of the policy brief, of course, I think Nadia will also appreciate that afterwards. But let me go to Professor Countouris and to Karoline, whoever wants to go after.
Okay, sure. I've taken a slightly different approach when I looked at these policy briefs. So forgive me if I sound a little bit more like a school teacher, perhaps. Maybe also because the work that I do, I review a lot of documents from colleagues, and what I'm very focused on is the message consistent? Are there inconsistencies? Know your audience? Is it well targeted? So this has mainly been my focus when I reviewed this brief. So it was numbered number 5. It doesn't have a title, and that's my first comment, that for a policy brief you should have a title. And it should ideally, I think, frame the message, but at least you should know as a reader what is the subject of what I'm about to read. But I can just recap. So reading this brief, it's about moving from traditional public procurement into sustainable public procurement, and identifying 46 drivers for sustainable public procurement. And as I was reading this brief, yes, and I hope you will. I'm sorry if some of these things are a bit negative, because I think overall, to maybe start positively, it's super interesting to be presented with a view of sustainable public procurement like this, to have all these drivers identified, and there was also a graph, a figure on the second page that was very illustrating of where you place these different drivers. But I would say it was very hard for me, even after reading 2 or 3 times what the main message was of this policy brief. I was not really sure, and I still am not quite. So to be very concrete, I was unsure of whether is it about that sustainable public procurement requires organizational changes, or is it about defining and ranking all the drivers? And is it about analyzing the drivers? So that came way down, like almost at the end of the first page of the policy brief. So if that is the key message, you should move it up. It should be kind of in the beginning. And then what was really good, I liked, so in the second section there was some examples from real life. This is in a paragraph discussing the practices of sustainable public procurement in Brazil and in Sweden. And it is really good, and I believe as policymakers that you get some figures. There are very clear percentages and also dollar amounts and also kind of concrete impact that sustainable public procurement has had in a particular field. That there was, for instance, 65% reduction of carbon emissions in a Dutch hospital. These are very tangible facts. It's something that if this brief was directed at a politician, something they can grab onto and use. Another example, that 39% of organic food was served by Swedish public sectors as a result of sustainable public procurement. So facts like these, I think, would be really good for a policymaker. So maybe have a bit more of that. And then I would say also the style, that it's quite compact. I think it's clear that this person is super knowledgeable in the area, and I think it's a challenge to not overload your policy brief. The challenge is in simplifying the message, because your audience, either they don't have the patience, even if they have the tools to understand what you're presenting to them, they may not have the time. It's like when you apply for a job and you send a CV. I mean, people will not have a lot of time. It will be scanned probably. Somebody will not spend 2 hours reviewing your policy brief. So try to be a bit not so compact text, have some subheadings. And then I would say, I've already use simple words. I mean, there was one sentence where it said, although this research findings shouldn't be transferred automatically to other contexts, the knowledge provided by this analysis can be used to raise awareness of the identified drivers, etc. But it was going back to be transferred automatically to other contexts. Okay, what do you mean concretely? How, if it can be transferred to other countries? Is it because you have studied examples in Brazil and Sweden? So use maybe simpler words to get your message across. And then I needed something at the end, because it said, what are the primary recipients of this policy brief? And you had identified a very wide range of recipients, and it's too wide. It's politicians, public managers, procurement officers, industry, NGOs, and academia, and that is simply too wide. You have to know, because they come with different levels of knowledge, and they also have different needs. So you should not have such a wide audience. It risks, I mean, then your policy brief will not really be picked up and used, which is the intention of the brief. And then I would also like to know from whom this brief has come from. I mean, I know you are anonymous here, but just it's because even if you are a researcher and you are data driven, nothing is objective. I mean, we all have our own agendas, and if I was somebody who was forming a policy and I was reading a brief, I would want to know, where does this person come from? What is this person's agenda? Because I would be reading different briefs and I would come up with the policy I thought was the best based on what I could read. So it's important to know where you come from, what you present. And yes, so I said there was a bit too much information. The message has to be simplified. And the ending was also a bit abrupt. You should end with summarizing it and have one key message, I would say. So, and I apologize for the maybe negativity, but if we were to, sit face to face, then it would be more maybe well balanced. But since we don't have a lot of time, and I thought maybe it would be useful, and I think also Danes are known to be quite direct, so not really. So these were just my key messages in this brief. But it was super interesting to get a chance to read these, I have to say, yeah.
Thank you.
Yes,
Actually, we just had a training yesterday about how to craft policy brief and how to draft messages. So actually, all these policy briefs have been drafted without any prior training. So just to remind that.
Yeah.
And yesterday, actually, all the points that you picked came up. So having a clear title, identifying very well your knowledge, be very, very specific, not just thinking about a plethora of stakeholder, really target your message to make it more readable, more interesting, more to the point. Simplification, I think we all struggle with that in research. We spend months and months and years maybe doing a research, and then we want to tell you everything about it, no? So it's very hard to do that. Compact text, yes, also yesterday we learned how to actually unpack the text, and how even visualization of text in a page actually can make a lot of difference. So thank you very much, because you really gave us a lot of good feedback that resonates well with what we had yesterday. Professor Countouris, you the art task.
Okay, so look, your academics, it's not easy to express a thought in less than 100,000 words. Let's be open about this. I struggle myself. So what I'm going to say now is learn through trial and error. But policy briefs have a place in an impact strategy, in a communication strategy, and they have a very important place. I was surprised, but that shows my ignorance, when I looked at the number of downloads of the publications at the ETUI. Okay. Edited books with fantastic luminaries, which we produce, have fewer downloads than policy briefs. Okay? So there is a communication strategy in order to achieve impact. Policy briefs play a very important role, perhaps the most important role. There's your tweet, there's your blog, 800 words, there's your policy brief, maximum 3,000 words, no footnotes. Then there's your article, working paper. To be honest, books, they serve a different purpose for research. Okay, it's a different purpose. It's a very important purpose. What you heard is exactly, well, I'm sure what you heard yesterday, what you should be doing with. It's an amuse-bouche. You want to communicate to someone that you have the answers to their problem. You want to give evidence that you have answers, so you need recommendations, you need bullet points. They need to be sufficiently detailed, okay? You don't want to have too much detail, because then you can't see the woods with all those trees, okay? And both policy briefs that I received fit these parameters. They're short, they're concise, they have 3 bullet points. I think, no more, you can't have 46 recommendations in a policy brief. It's no good. No. So simplification is really important. Audience, I completely agree. The first policy brief that I was assigned is a very interesting policy brief on public procurement and small and medium enterprises. I think it's a different one, though, judging from the comments. And it suggests that the audience are politicians and policymakers. To be honest, for me, that's part of the audience. For me, that policy brief has a captive audience, and it's small and medium enterprises. They're a legitimate audience. You can speak to them. In fact, one would hope that you have compared your notes with small and medium enterprises before coming up with recommendations on their behalf. And the question I would have asked the author, who actually has, it's a nice policy brief, I should say, has a narrative, it's good storytelling. Okay, there's a story there. People want to read a story in the 2 pages that you produce, and they want a problem and an answer. They don't want philosophical debates, 20 references to literature. They don't have the time. We heard it from people that actually it's their job to read policy brief. has this policy brief, have these recommendations been compared with the key stakeholder, okay, of that policy brief, which was small and medium enterprises? If you speak on behalf of an agent, I think you should have at the very least interacted with them. I think it lends credibility. And you learn so much as an academic, as opposed to, this all makes sense in my head when I wrote it in my office. Okay, it's a reality test, but it's a very important one. I speak from experience. Now, the recommendations were, I like them, they were clear. My sense is they reproduce the recommendations that are already being discussed in the context of the instrument that is being analyzed there. Okay. Now, question to the author would have been, do you have some recommendations that are original, that you have devised yourself, that are outside that box of tools that already exist? If not, if you're just building on existing recommendations that are already there in the policy debate, what is it that you're adding in terms of detail? Okay, in order to make them specific, to own them. Otherwise, if you're just saying that the recommendations of the directive are actually good recommendations, well, great. I'm sure somebody in the European Commission would give themselves a pat on the shoulder. But what is it you add? What is your story? Okay. So I'll stop with this policy brief. I was given a second one.
Yes.
Equally interesting.
Yes. No, thank you very much. I think what you actually encourage us to do is very important, to be very original, be very critical, not be afraid of really putting out our thoughts about something. As I said, sometimes we are shy, we know we are still learning and there's a long path. So I guess that's also play a role. And it's definitely also a great takeaway to actually speak with the agent, really understand what they think about. Sometimes we have this research just based on documental analysis, and we never really have the chance to consult with our stakeholder, and I think that's critical. So since you have actually two, by the way, these are policy brief that ESR volunteered to send to you because they wanted to have feedback on. So you can also go ahead with the second one. Oh, Arnhild, yes.
Yeah, I just want to say,
Sure.
because I didn't say anything about the structure.
Yes.
I think it was spot on. Structure was very good and it was spot on. And I think it was good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good, Nadia. Yes.
The second policy brief that I was assigned, this one didn't have a name. The first one had an author. I didn't mention it because I don't think it's necessary. This one, and again, the same. You need to. I'm sure you didn't put the name because it was an exercise. But obviously, you need to have a name because people need to know how to reach you. It's very important. So it was about first, second, and third generation FTAs, free trade agreements, sustainable procurement, sustainable development, and public procurement. Now, this was again a very interesting. It met those basic criteria in terms of being short, compelling, and original. Okay. One thing that I would say is be careful with using jargon that for you is trite knowledge, but it may not necessarily be trite knowledge for your audience or one of the audiences that you have picked. So for instance, this in the abstract, this policy brief talks about first, second, and third generation FTAs. I think I more or less know what they are, okay? But not everyone will know it, okay? And I would have expected, if it is really relevant, to have an explanation of what first, second, and third generation FTAs are. My fear is that perhaps this was not relevant, and this is why eventually the author didn't mention what the difference between the three types of FTAs is. But then if it's not relevant, don't mention it. You don't have words. This is not your 100,000 words book, okay? So my point here is about selectivity, okay? Only put what is absolutely essential to bring your points across. Okay, so you know what your recommendations are. What is it that you need to put in the policy brief in order to make those recommendations justifiable with a context, with some backing, rather than 3 random recommendations. Okay, so be careful. Don't use jargon that we know who reads the policy briefs mainly at the institute. We have, I'm afraid, we have data on who does the downloads, at least geographical data. And we also know from feedback that it's mainly trade unionists that, and so, we should not be using jargon that they don't understand, and there is no point for us using jargon that they already know, because we don't need to tell them what they already know, okay? So make sure you know who your audience is. In that policy brief, again, starting opening paragraph, audience, there's 10 different categories, no, there's 4 different types of audiences. Realistically, you cannot be speaking the same way to 4 different audiences. Choose at least one fundamental audience, and then maybe others will read it and love it as well. Okay. Now, the point that I was making before about comparative, what you can learn from legal systems, national legal systems, is carried out really nicely in this policy brief. It says that there is a certain legal system in Europe that actually provides a good example in order to achieve this kind of sustainability with free trade agreements, FTAs. But I didn't see examples of why it provides a good example. So it just mentioned there without, we need that story that we're talking about, that statistic, that the fact that, there was this problem and this was the solution for that problem. This always needs to be clear. And then the recommendations, okay, there are 3 recommendations, but they're literally 3 words. Okay, you need to have, you heard from the comments that were made about, her own recommendations for a solution from the depth of her knowledge, of course, which is uncommon, but this is the level of detail that you need to offer, not in a policy brief, of course, because you have 3,000 words or 2,000 words, but this is what policymakers are looking for. They're looking for technical solutions. They're not looking for concepts. The world of concepts is of limited interest to them unless they're trying to understand a new context, which also came up. Okay, so these will be my tips for the second part. Both of them met. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So again, here it comes back the importance of providing examples, and also to provide detailed recommendations. So thank you very much to the 3 of you for actually reading, taking the time to provide us with valuable feedback. Of course, this feedback can be applied to all the policy brief that we drafted. And before we leave, I wanted to ask you one last question. Since you read this policy brief and we just talked about structure and content a bit, I want to ask you about the channel. So we actually prepared this policy brief. According to you, according to the policy brief that you read, which channel would you use to actually convey this policy brief to who should read it? Of course, whoever wants to go first.
Okay. Well, look, first of all, it has to be freely and openly accessible. If you put a paywall, au revoir. People won't read things on paywall, which is a problem with our academic publications sometimes. Okay. So at a certain level, there are some publishers that will guarantee you greater access because they already have an audience. There will be some blog posts that will be already. If you can find, if you can park your paper there, your policy brief there, more power to you. Sometimes, as a young PhD student, researcher, the best you can hope for is that your faculty publishes it and they will have their own audience. It may not necessarily be an audience of policymakers, though. Most likely an audience of academics. So here again, you need to cultivate this relationship. It's a coveted relationship, the one with policymakers. It's something you develop over time. You need money, you need resources to do that, to invite people, but first of all, you need to know who you are and who your audience is. Okay? And I think it's not so much where you publish it, okay, especially if you're established and you already have an audience, is how you market it. Okay? So I would say, okay, the platform is important. It needs to be freely accessible, okay? But most important is how you bring in that platform to your audience, because your audience receives 1 million inputs and none. How do you bring it to their attention? And I'm afraid this is where you need social media, this is where you need communication offices, this is where you need communication strategies. Can you embed the policy brief into a blog post? Can you embed it? And it's not easy for academics. You know, it's not easy. We have so many things to do, and sometimes we don't like doing these things. Can I be completely open with you? I didn't have a Twitter account before going to the ETUI. Okay, as soon as I went there, they gave me a mobile phone. I didn't have a mobile phone. They opened me a Twitter account, put me on Google Scholars. Google Scholars, I hated Google Scholars. You know? But of course, my research was important for the institutes, and I recognized that there was a public good there. Okay? It's not, we're not, can I tell you something else? But don't tell anyone. Okay? I left the institute a week ago. I don't have Twitter anymore, and I don't have a mobile phone anymore. I'm back, I'm regressing to my own, so what I'm telling to you, you know, I'm preaching, but, and this is how we are. We're strange animals, okay? Twitter, au revoir, gone, mobile phone. I go back to write 100,000 words. Not great, but let's be honest about it. It's a challenge. You really have to work hard.
Yes, Arnhild.
Could I comment on that? Very interesting what you say, because I heard on a radio interview this summer that Norwegian novelists need to put their novels on social media. They need to tell about themselves, and it was a discussion. Do they need that? No, they don't need it, but it's good for their own. And I think that is a good advice. We are on Twitter, Facebook, whatever, yes, LinkedIn, do it.
We struggle as well, not with policy briefs, but just when we put out calls for tenders to reach the audience. So, okay, first of all, what is your audience? Who are you trying to reach? But we're doing a lot more. So it's, you know, it's Facebook, it's LinkedIn. I mean, using all these channels. And we have a communications department, and we've actually started investing a lot more, having external experts, because we don't necessarily have the expertise in-house. So we get communications experts simply to communicate our messages, outreach, you know, and we have events. And sometimes it's a physical presence that will establish this platform, or yeah, the only way that you can build some connections, you go to an event, you go to a workshop, it may not pay off immediately, but I mean, it's networking also. Mm-hmm. But it's a huge challenge, irrespective of whether or not it's a policy brief or whether you have a different kind of message. Mm-hmm. And we can also see that, I mean, we produce reports, and we used to have them in a physical form to publish them. But then, you know, it's bad for the environment. It's a waste of money. Now you can download, and actually it's quite scary. You don't see a lot of downloads. Our most popular report, and we know this is every year because it's something that interests the most people, is the quality of the bathing water. Mm-hmm. Every year it's by miles. It's and we struggle getting other reports out that we find are interesting and innovative. But it's picked up by journalists. It's an easy message. And it's recurring, and it's in a slow time of the year, slow news cycle, so it's a positive story. But it's a huge challenge, yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think it's for all of us, it's just to adjust to different registers to be able to always convey our message in the most effective way, whereas we are bombarded with information all the time. So definitely a skill that we all need to develop from the youngest to the most experienced professional in different subjects. So thank you very much to all of you for this wonderful session, for sharing your experience, for taking the time again to read our policy brief. I'm sure our PhDs benefited a lot from your expertise. I would like to close with a very positive message. What I really liked about this session was like, we are not complaining. There's a gap between policy and research, but actually there are also actionable solutions. So let's be bridges rather than creating barriers. And I think that's what we all need to do, and we need to equip ourselves for doing that via training, via collaboration, via, of course, experience, and via listening to this wonderful expert of ours. So let me help you and give them a round of applause.